So I'd like to thank Sustainable Building Manitoba for inviting me to speak today at what is clearly an important event in our province for anyone with an interest in sustainable buildings. I would also like to commend Sustainable Building Manitoba's committed leadership in the promotion of sustainable practices in construction organizations. Sustainable Manitoba, or Sustainable Building Manitoba, is an important contributor to the provincial dialogue on climate change and sustainability. I would like to take this opportunity to also reflect on and highlight a few accomplishments and developments and share with you Manitoba's strong ongoing commitment to improving the energy and environmental performance of new and existing buildings in our province. Climate change is causing extreme weather events such as floods, high-intensity storms, and wildfires more frequently, posing significant risks to our built environment. While we have a robust building stock, we need to ensure that our built assets can withstand more frequent and more severe weather events. Canada's building codes are modernized every 5 years. Manitoba's Expert Advisory Council has recommended modernizing our building codes to reduce the risk and ensure Manitoba's built environment is prepared and, to the greatest extent possible, capable of withstanding extreme events that we know are occurring with increased frequency. In October 2020, Manitoba ratified the Building Codes Regulatory Reconciliation and Cooperation Table, or RCT, agreement under the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, which commits our province to adopt the most current national building codes and harmonize code requirements across provincial and territorial jurisdictions and federally. In addition, Bill 38, the Building and Electrical Permitting Improvement Act, which is currently tabled in the Manitoba Legislature, proposes to amend the Buildings and Mobile Homes Act to require that new editions of the national model codes be adopted no later than 24 months after release and subsequent versions 18 months after release. Manitoba is currently reviewing the 2017 National Energy Code for Buildings, or the NECB, for possible adoption by regulation in the near future. Modeling suggests that, in comparison to the current Manitoba Code, the 2017 version of the National Energy Code improves energy performance in new buildings by 10% to 14%. We will consult with industry and other stakeholders to finalize any amendments to the National Energy Code necessary to maintain the advancements achieved in Manitoba. Our government's Climate and Green Plan sets a bold vision for Manitoba to become the cleanest, greenest, and most climate resilient province in Canada. It includes a variety of tools to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, adapt to a changing climate, and build a prosperous green economy and conserve our natural environment for both current and future generations to enjoy. One of the key initiatives under the Climate Plan is Efficiency Manitoba, which officially commenced operations and implementation activities associated with its approved 2020-2023 Efficiency Plan on April 1st, 2020. Efficiency Manitoba was established as a new Crown corporation to deliver cost-effective energy savings programs and services, offering rebates and incentives for energy-efficient equipment and retrofit measures. Efficiency Manitoba has a 15-year energy savings target, which are embedded into legislation. This is unique in North America. With the participation of Manitoba homeowners and businesses, these targets will prompt higher than previously seen energy savings in Manitoba. Our government remains committed to leading by example. We have adopted the first carbon savings account in North America and set a cumulative 1 megaton GHG emissions reduction goal over a 5-year period. Our government is committed to investing in energy efficiency to reduce energy use, consumer costs, and our carbon footprint by providing tax credits for geothermal and solar thermal energy systems. Up to 15% are available to homeowners and commercial building owners. Last but not least, Manitoba recognizes that a forward-looking energy strategy that sets out the province's plan for the forthcoming energy transition to a future with fewer fossil fuels and significantly lowering the GHG emissions is absolutely necessary. Our government is actively working towards a new provincial energy strategy that will help us leverage our clean energy advantage. Staff from the Department of Conservation and Climate, in consultation with Manitoba Hydro, Efficiency Manitoba, and other stakeholders, will develop a long-term energy strategy that builds on Manitoba's significant renewable electricity assets, including greening of transportation, new biofuel standards, and energy conservation measures. The strategy will consider the opportunities and challenges that may arise from emerging energy resources and technologies like hydrogen, electrification of heat and transportation, energy storage, and others. For example, it will explore some of hydrogen's most promising applications in industrial manufacturing, built environment, transportation, and power generation. Unique opportunities exist for governments, the private sector, and organizations such as Sustainable Building Manitoba to work together to further develop guidelines, codes, standards, and best practices for efficient and climate resilient buildings. I would like to acknowledge the wealth of experience your members have and the important role that you will play in advancing sustainable building solutions for our province. Your work is incredibly important and greatly appreciated. Our government remains solidly committed to keeping Manitoba a leader in encouraging better practices to reduce energy use, water consumption, and other environmental impacts of buildings. I would now like to introduce Leanne Shuchuk, Director of Stakeholder Relations and Reporting for our Climate and Green Plan Implementation Office, who will be providing you all a presentation on some of the province's initiatives for the building sector. She will also be able to answer any technical questions that you may have after the presentation. Should you have any questions that may be suited to some other departments, my staff are happy to take them back and connect with you and with our counterparts across government. We look forward to learning from you and working with you as we implement our Climate and Green Plan. Thank you for your input today. Leanne, would you like to take over from here?
Your presentation is looking great, and now Excellent. You're unmuted.
Great. It's always a challenge to find that unmute button. So welcome everyone, and I too wish to acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. Just to highlight many of the items that the Minister has recently just mentioned. Talk just briefly about the Climate and Green Plan. That one of the things, of course, is that we do have this fantastic goal of being of Canada's cleanest, greenest, and most climate resilient province. The 4 pillars of the Climate and Green Plan really speak to this. And so many of the priority actions that are framed as keystones are directly related to buildings, our built infrastructure. So clean energy, sector emissions reductions, adaptation, innovation, financing, investment, skills, and training. And as we have already talked about, the carbon savings account is how we're starting to measure how we're getting there. But just to give it a little bit of a background in terms of where we are right now, buildings make up approximately 11% of Manitoba's emissions, which translates into about 2.2 megatons from buildings, respectively. We have some of the lowest emissions from buildings across the country, and that's of course because our emissions from electricity are almost non-existent. And so what we see is these emissions are coming from the stationary combustion of fossil fuels for space and water heating. And overall, from 1990 to 2018, we've seen a decrease overall, a really great decrease in residential. Again, that has a lot to do with increased standards around, in terms of performance of equipment, and also increased standards around insulation in buildings. And commercial buildings too have followed suit. When we look to climate trends, those are also of interest to us. So we do have impacts that are coming this way. They will affect our building energy demands. They are also going to influence the resiliency of our built environment, including buildings and how those buildings perform. And we are going to need to adapt and change the way we plan, design, and build. The energy efficiency initiatives the minister has already touched on. And so just to note again that the energy codes, there have been improvements recommended by Manitoba's Expert Advisory Council, which is established under the Climate and Green Plan. And with the obvious note that modernizing those codes are going to provide really long-term benefits to reducing emissions, but also significant benefits to building owners around operating costs. Manitoba has ratified the Regulatory Reconciliation and Cooperation Table Agreement, and that is pointing us in the direction of adopting the most current national building codes and harmonizing those codes with the requirements across provincial and territorial boundaries. The energy efficiency programs are being operated out of Efficiency Manitoba. EM has really just been on operation for 1 year now, and they're offering a range of electrical and natural gas efficiency programs across the spectrum for residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural. And those programs are continuing to evolve as we move forward here. One of the ways that these programs have been evolved is that Manitoba has signed on to the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund with the federal government. And so the federal government is helping to cost share approximately 50% of Efficiency Manitoba's natural gas efficiency programming. And that's a 3-year commitment. So we're looking forward to seeing the industry and uptake on this program so that we can see those substantive reductions in natural gas use and those switches over to more efficient platforms that will drive our emissions further down. The green energy equipment tax credit that the minister also noted. So there is the refundable 15% tax credit for geothermal capital installation, plus a tax credit for Manitoba equipment if that's used. So that can even drive it up further. We also have a refundable 10% tax credit for solar thermal energy systems, which again offers some new and interesting opportunities for us. I did also want to talk a little bit briefly about something that doesn't really get a lot of attention, but I think it's an important component about how government is approaching this file. Within government, across all of the government reporting entities, we refer to it as low carbon government. And there is a framework. We have the Low Carbon Government Office located within our unit. And they are focused on helping all of government implement the provincial green building policies. They are also driving improvements in the understanding of the building portfolio across all of government, including schools, health, crown corporations, etc., through annual performance reporting. And we're just into, I believe it's year 2 of that performance reporting, but we're already seeing extremely interesting conversations emerge around that people may not have recognized where their energy performance were. So various entities were not necessarily identifying that. So it's really bringing it to the forefront. And that with this has come about across government community of practice, that sharing knowledge on energy improvements and advancing sustainability opportunities as well. And so one of the things that we're looking to from this is that we think that we're also going to be seeing this group make recommendations on next targets and practices for low carbon government, but that those may also and will probably influence where we see standards and targets and recommendations and guidance materials starting to emerge for industry in general in Manitoba. Product standards, of course, are of importance. Just wanted to note that Manitoba has ratified the Household Appliance Agreement, so that this also helps to improve the efficiency of equipment, household appliance equipment that's available for us. To speak a little bit about building adaptation and resiliency, and that's, building in, I guess, double quotes here. We recognize the importance of the preparation and investment in a very resilient province. And what the province has been doing is that there's been heavy investment in climate knowledge, in the readiness of communities to be climate resilient, and in partnership approaches. And there's sort of three areas that you may be familiar with. The Climate Atlas of Canada has been heavily supported by the province of Manitoba. That's through the Prairie Climate Centre at the University of Winnipeg. And that's bringing really accessible information on climate, making it available to everyone so that it helps everyone understand and think about the changing climate and what it might mean for the decisions that they're making. In addition to this, the Manitoba has been instrumental on the Prairie Regional Adaptation Collaborative. They have a really nice website with information around adaptation that, of course, provides information for industry and communities. And there is also, we are also involved with the Manitoba Climate Resiliency Training Project. And over the next 18 months, we are going to see 900 professionals in planning and engineering and other building sectors, as well as Indigenous communities, receive training to support decision-making around adaptation planning. And that will influence, of course, the built environment as well. And as we move looking forward, we've talked about the minister talked about the adoption of the new building codes and the supporting legislation that's currently underway. You should be looking to see a discussion on the provincial energy strategy. We'll be reaching out across stakeholders and partners, looking for input and feedback on various components, as well as the general public. And also the Climate West on the adaptation front is just launched. It's a Prairie Provinces partnership along with Environment Canada that's going to further advance adaptation knowledge, vulnerability risk assessment, and capacity building. So that will also be shoring up the other side of it, which is adapting to the climate changes that we are likely to see. So thank you. That's our presentation. And if you have any questions, we'd love to hear them. We've got our general mailbox on the slide, but also there's my email address if you prefer to direct those comments to myself.
Great, thank you so much. If you just want to stop sharing your screen there in a moment, we can add people to being spotlit and start answering these questions. All right, so, no, okay.
Hi, Laura. I'm sorry, this is just the minister's staff here. I just wanted to let people know before we get into questions that the minister had to step away from the conference to go in for a vote, but the department is available to answer questions.
Okay, great. Thank you for that update. I appreciate that. I guess that would explain why I couldn't find her on the list. All right, so we have some questions here in the chat that I'm going to help read out. And yeah, so can you tell us about the process planned to interact with members of the policy community, including organizations and the general public, to develop the provincial energy strategy?
That's a great question. And the reason I say that's a great question is because we are just in the process of thinking about what that's going to look like. So any ideas or thoughts that that folks around this conference have, we'd love to hear from you. We're looking, of course, about a process that's probably going to be digitally driven, given our current environment. But if, ideas and thoughts around that, we would be grateful to hear from everyone on that.
Okay, so when will Manitoba version NECB 2017 and NBCC 2017 be the law?
That's another really good question as well. I think this is one that we will probably come back to you on. We know that this is something that municipal relations, one of our sister departments, is in charge of, and so in order to give you, the best information possible, I think it's one that we'll just bring back to you on that.
All right, so how does your commitment to cumulative reductions of 1 MT of GHG relate to the Paris Accord savings required to prevent long-term climate change?
Again, a really good question. And it's Manitoba is in a really unique position because going into the Paris Accord and the previous Kyoto Accord, Manitoba sat in a position where we were not in the same state as other jurisdictions with our emissions from electricity being now almost non-existent. Back in 2018, there were still emissions associated with, previous to 2018, there were still emissions with the Selkirk generating station being in play, but that station has closed. So that no longer is a factor. So there's been some reductions from those sorts of items. So most of our reductions are going to need to come from two sources. They're going to need to come from our built environment and also industry operations, and they're also going to need to come from transportation. And of course, there's been quite a bit that's been done around making things much more efficient over the last couple of decades. But now we're getting into some of the tougher things that we'll need in order to move those emissions, to drive those emissions down. So getting back to the question about where does the 1 megaton stand? So what we're trying to do with this is we're trying to measure what kinds of influence government decisions are having and how are we driving emission, and how are those decisions making positive contributions towards the Paris Accord, whether it even be to not allow those emissions to edge up further. But I would say that we're at the beginning stages of this, and as technology evolves and also as opportunities emerge, we're going to see more movement on this. So hopefully that answers your question. Again, happy to take more longer discussion on this. So please reach out anytime.
All right, so if folks have follow-up questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat or to raise your hand so that we can keep building on things. But moving on to the next one, $32.2 million from the federal government are coming in. Is this just subsidizing existing programs? Are there new ones being created?
Efficiency Manitoba laid out its 3-year plan for programs. So it is supporting Efficiency Manitoba's 3-year plan. So it is in keeping with those programs that are available. Or that were identified, and it's one of the reasons why Canada and Manitoba were able to come together on a plan, and for Efficiency Manitoba to be designated to roll those out. So they currently have been identified by Efficiency Manitoba, and so again, but it does create space for these kinds of things to happen, which is fantastic. It's a great partnership.
Okay, so can you tell us whether anyone from the province has read the buildings chapter of the recent Road to Resilience that Manitoba's Climate Action Team published? And they'd love to know your thoughts.
I would say that I have read it, and I would love to engage in a discussion with that. Please reach out.
So the next one is, are there offsets planned for the 4 years of increase in GHG associated with the Kiosk Dam coming on stream?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. Are there offsets planned for the 4 years of increase in GHG associated with the Kiosk Dam coming on stream?
That's a really excellent question. They're all good questions, but that's a really excellent question. And it is one that I would definitely say we probably should get back to you on this question of offsets. Offsets is an ongoing discussion that's happening nationally. And it's shifting as we go. So In terms of how the kiosk will play into that offsets availability, I can't tell you at this time, but it's a really interesting area, a really interesting part of the space that's happening right now.
Okay, so the next question is, a prophetic presentation yesterday suggested natural gas/gasoline will become obsolete fuels with geo and electric as substitutes. What recommendations does the Low Carbon Government Office have to ensure MB Hydro divests from distribution to heat homes?
Well, I think I would point out that Manitoba has taken first an interim step in terms of the biofuels regulation that has come out, so that we now have the highest biofuel component in our transportation fuels across Canada. So, and Canada is actually just upping their standards to meet ours in some ways. So, it's that's sort of the interim piece. In terms of how does hydro look towards this? Well, I think it's again one of these really good questions, because we are at a point in time when some of these things, which were deep conundrums, we're starting to see some potential pathways forward. In terms of how hydro is going to approach this, I certainly would like to engage hydro on where their current thoughts are. But it is something that is offering some opportunities where where you say 5 years ago, things were maybe a little bit more unclear as to what the route forward might be. So again, no firm answer for you, but certainly some opportunities are starting to show.
Laura Tyler, are you all right if I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
My name is Bethany, and I'm following up to the question that I asked about the road to resilience. Super intrigued by, well, I appreciate the fact that you've read it. I've spent a little bit of time reviewing it and find the information that's provided there quite helpful. The steps that are laid out to very practically move forward. I'm very curious, I guess, first of all, with you saying you want to engage further. Obviously, we're limited in time to an extent, but with the steps that are laid out in there, largely in part by folks from Sustainable Building Manitoba, who spent a lot of time looking at that. Yeah, just curious about the support that the province would provide for this solution that now has been laid out in front of the province and other industry experts, yeah, within the province.
It's I would say that I've read it as an individual. It has been a really busy time in our office with some of the discussions that are going on between federal and provincial governments right now. So in terms of us having a discussion around, in terms of what the office has to look at, I can't give you that. What I can tell you is we appreciate that the effort has gone into it. And again, we do have this discussion that's going to be happening around an energy strategy. And of course, this piece can become part of that dialogue, I would think, where certainly it's some of your thoughts on where things should go. And so we will be looking at this, is something that I would say in terms of what this means for looking at that energy strategy, but also in terms of where so much of this is going right now. So that's where I would say we're at right at this moment. So, and again, that's why I said, yeah, this would be really great to engage on. We'd love to have a longer discussion on this.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I guess there are one other questions. I guess the one follow-up thing I will just quickly add, is there anything that you feel like as citizens we can do to assist in that process? Are there people we can reach out to encourage them to start reviewing some of these plans that are in place for issues that are so critical?
I think you've done a really good job at sort of advertising that that you've gone through this exercise, and that there's been a great deal of thought put into it. So I think you're doing all the right things from that perspective. And of course, I'm interested to watch the presentation tomorrow as well. But it's yeah, I think you're doing all the right things, and it's a really synergistic time for this to have happened in terms of in terms of what's happening provincially and federally, and the discussions that are happening internationally. So, yeah.